Tonight's story is far from a typical Hollywood scandal. It's a full-blown legal meltdown with Blake Lively squarely in the center, presenting a stark contrast between the polished perfection she projects on red carpets and the chaos unfolding in court documents, which paint her less as a victim and more as a villain, as two judges, one in New York and one in Texas, decisively shut down her attempts to target Justin Baldwin's team, ruling that the courts lacked personal jurisdiction, effectively tossing out her cases before even considering the claims themselves, marking a catastrophic strategic misstep that undermines her legal credibility, while Baldwin remains calm, professional, and focused, allowing the legal process to work without resorting to public outbursts, accusations, or media spectacles, highlighting the contrast between a disciplined, evidence-based defense and a strategy driven by pressure, manipulation, and control, which, as court documents reveal, was Blake's entire approach, since her plan depended on forcing parties into venues where she could corner, intimidate, and dominate the narrative. Yet both New York and Texas judges dismissed her efforts, including the dismissal of Jed Wallace in New York and her own rejection in Texas, creating the image of someone trapped by their own overreach. And that's just the beginning, because the filings expose that Blake wasn't merely defending herself. She was seeking power, control of the narrative, of the lawsuit, and most critically, of the sequel to It Ends With Us, aiming to wrest creative authority, directing rights, intellectual property leverage, and the spotlight away from Baldwin and Wayfair Studios, who legally own the project, with documents confirming her intention to achieve these objectives even if it meant tarnishing Baldwin's reputation. Yet her plan was fundamentally flawed because Colleen Hoover, the only individual who could theoretically support Blake's shared legal interest claim, testified under oath that she had never intended to sue Wayfair or Baldwin, nullifying Blake's privilege claims and collapsing her legal strategy, as her attempt to use Hoover's name as cover fell apart under sworn testimony, triggering the collapse of her legal theory, like a set prop falling, which now forces Blake to scramble over redactions, privilege logs, and procedural technicalities while the factual record increasingly undermines her position, highlighting that she never truly had control, whereas Baldwin and Wayfair have transparently produced emails, documents, and communications to substantiate their claims, leaving Blake to respond with obfuscation, recreations, and withheld materials, further eroding her credibility, as exemplified by the infamous 30-point return to set protections document, which she claims was central to her safety but refuses to provide an original, verified version, submitting only edited copies, some of which appear on her privilege log to avoid disclosure entirely, and her communications with Hoover, supposedly protected under common interest privilege, collapse under scrutiny since Hoover testified she had no intention of suing, making any claimed common interest non-existent, creating a scenario where Blake's legal foundation disintegrates as witnesses present consistent, verifiable facts, causing heavier redactions, technical excuses, and frantic attempts to obscure the truth, while every court filing and deposition gradually exposes her pattern of overreach, manipulation, and desperate legal maneuvering, revealing that her focus has never been on safety or justice, but on seizing control over projects and narratives she does not legally own, with her credibility further diminished by the contrast between her recreated documents, selective disclosures, and reliance on privilege claims, versus Baldwin's methodical, evidence-backed defense, which presents a clear, transparent, and consistent record that courts and public opinion can evaluate, underscoring the broader failure of her legal strategy, where repeated contradictions, lack of transparency, and misleading claims illustrate a calculated but collapsing attempt to dominate both legal and public spheres, as each failure compounds the perception of desperation, manipulation, and lack of integrity, while Baldwin's measured approach emphasizes restraint, professionalism, and factual substantiation, showing that attempts to control, intimidate, or suppress legal opposition ultimately fail when the truth is documented, verifiable, and consistently presented. And in this context, Blake's empire, influence, and carefully curated public persona are simultaneously unraveling, exposed by procedural missteps, flawed privilege claims, and the undeniable record of factual inconsistencies, while the court of public and legal scrutiny closes in. demonstrating that even a star with power, fame, and public adoration cannot escape accountability, and that in the battle between manipulation and transparency, truth, clarity, and integrity prevail, leaving Blake Lively not only losing control of the legal process and public narrative, but facing the broader consequences of strategic overreach, misrepresentation, and failed attempts to dominate both her legal and professional environment, marking a pivotal moment where her credibility, authority, and influence are in serious jeopardy, and the ongoing exposure of these facts is likely to shape both her career and public perception for years to come. For Blake Lively, the biggest threat isn't just Justin Baldwin, it's what the evidence actually reveals about her, and her legal troubles go far beyond missing documents, reaching the type of danger every attorney fears. Evidence that may be inadmissible in another court, potentially derailing her entire strategy, because after losing in both Texas and New York, California would normally be her next option. A place where she could theoretically start over, but the state's strict digital privacy laws create a massive obstacle, particularly regarding her subpoena for Jen Ayle's phone contents, which she obtained through a New York order without notifying the employee, a requirement under California law, meaning any attempt to use that evidence there could result in immediate exclusion or a legal challenge questioning the legality of its collection, and that's only the beginning. As moving the case, West would invite scrutiny over her discovery methods, including missing original documents, recreated copies, and privilege claims that collapse in light of Colleen Hoover's testimony that she never intended to sue, nullifying Blake's claimed common interest shield, leaving her stuck, unable to proceed without exposing the full extent of her tactics, while Jed Wallace avoids refiling to escape being dragged into a hostile jurisdiction, and Baldwin patiently watches as every avenue Blake pursues closes in her face, demonstrating that this legal chaos isn't about safety, workplace protection, or justice, but rather control over something far bigger. The sequel to It Ends With Us, It Starts With Us, as internal filings and communications reveal that her true aim was to undermine Baldwin, damage Wayfair Studios' credibility, and seize the sequel rights for herself. And though it may sound dramatic, the paperwork substantiates this timeline, showing that after the first film wrapped, Blake desired extensive creative control, directing authority, and the spotlight, but Baldwin and Wayfair legally owned the rights, not Blake, Ryan Reynolds, or Colleen Hoover, and when rumors surfaced that Ryan allegedly offered millions to buy Justin out, which Justin refused, Blake escalated, suddenly filing a lawsuit, raising misconduct claims, hinting at Hoover joining her effort, and implying the sequel could be wrested from Wayfair if she uncovered enough issues. Yet Hoover's sworn testimony dismantled that narrative entirely, confirming she had no plans to sue, no interest in supporting Blake's claims, and no involvement in any attempt to shift control, leaving Blake's entire strategy baseless, as the sequel remained firmly under Wayfair's ownership, unattainable to Blake, her legal campaign collapsing before it even truly began, illustrating that Blake didn't merely lose a single legal fight, she lost her leverage, her opportunity to manipulate outcomes, and the central goal of controlling the next film, while every misstep, from improperly obtained evidence to overreaching claims, serves to highlight a broader pattern of desperation and overreach, leaving her isolated legally and strategically, with Baldwin standing firmly on documented facts, unshaken and unmanipulated, as Blake's own filings, actions, and failed attempts to pressure or intimidate reveal the fragility of her position, and the court documents, combined with Hoover's testimony, make it painfully clear that her plans to co-opt the sequel, exert creative dominance and force outcomes in her favor were doomed from the outset, emphasizing that while Hollywood often sees power struggles and PR battles, this case demonstrates the risks of overreach, the consequences of ignoring legal limits, and the inevitability of truth prevailing when evidence and documentation reveal the actual facts, leaving Blake Lively not just defeated in court, but exposed in motive and method. Her attempts to seize control thwarted entirely, her credibility in tatters, and the path she hoped to take toward manipulating ownership and authority over the sequel entirely closed, marking a decisive loss that extends far beyond a single ruling to undermine her entire position in the ongoing dispute. Blake Lively's biggest prize, the sequel to It Ends With Us, is now completely out of reach, and Hollywood insiders are quietly confirming what everyone can see. For Blake, the project isn't stalled. It's dead, and the reasons are clear, starting with the simple fact that Wayfair Studios owns It Starts With Us outright, with Colleen Hoover having sold the rights long before the book became a bestseller, finalizing the sale with no morality clauses, no strings attached, and no loopholes, meaning the rights were never coming back to Blake, and she had no legal path to seize them. But that's only part of the problem. Justin Baldwin's creative choice to remove the character Ryle from the ending of the first film has created a narrative obstacle for Blake, as Ryle drives the central conflict of the sequel, complicates Lily's relationship with Atlas, and fuels the tension of the story, and with him erased on screen, Blake's envisioned version of the sequel simply cannot exist, forcing her to rebuild from scratch, a feat she lacks any authority to execute. Yet the most damaging factor is how Blake's legal maneuvers have become a public spectacle, with judges dismissing portions of her claims, Colleen Hoover's testimony directly contradicting her assertions, and every new filing making her appear less like an actress seeking justice and more like a strategist attempting to force a narrative in her favor. Meaning Blake didn't just lose control of the sequel, she burned bridges, destroyed scripts, and undermined the entire set, while simultaneously, the public battle unfolds with equal clarity, and Blake continues losing because every filing, accusation, and aggressive move only highlights the same fundamental issue. Her story doesn't match the facts, as the documents, timelines, and sworn testimonies repeatedly expose a pattern where she pushes claims contradicted by evidence, attacks targets only to see judges dismiss her arguments, and promises proof that never materializes. While the internet follows every rejection, from Wayfair denying her claims, Texas courts refusing to tie Jed Wallace to her argument, digital footprint evidence disproving her theories, to her promise that other women would back her claims never coming to fruition, and her assertion that Hoover was part of her legal strategy directly contradicted under oath. Meanwhile, every party she accuses, including Baldwin, Wayfair, and Wallace, continues to provide full transparency, with documents, texts, emails, and records, while Blake withholds, redacts, and fights against court orders, fueling the public's growing disapproval. And although Hollywood traditionally loves comeback stories, flawed heroes, or misunderstood troublemakers, it cannot tolerate someone manipulating a narrative, overplaying their hand, and blaming everyone else when it collapses, and Blake is doing exactly that. Not only doubling down but digging deeper, with each new filing attempting to overshadow the last, each accusation louder than the substantiation behind it, turning her PR fire into a full-blown reputation collapse, while her legal strategy has also become increasingly erratic, ignoring missing evidence, failed jurisdiction, and Hoover's testimony, and instead flooding the court with attacks on others, a pattern now recognized by judges, attorneys, and reporters alike, as she prioritizes distraction over clarification, exemplified by her latest claim that Jed Wallace and Melissa Nathan are misusing redactions, manipulating documents, and hiding information. Yet when the court reviewed these claims, the reality was humiliating for Blake, as the documents in question had already been produced in other forms. Many were insignificant, and in multiple cases, her attempts to frame these parties only emphasized her increasingly desperate position, leaving her legal strategy unraveling while the public narrative continues to shift irreversibly against her. And the sequel, her original goal, remains firmly out of reach, with no legal, creative, or public path left to reclaim it, marking a total collapse of Blake Lively's control, influence, and carefully constructed Hollywood image. Blake Lively's legal filings have become a spectacle of redactions, recreated documents, and privilege claims that collapse the moment Colleen Hoover speaks, with judges noticing every inconsistency, missing 30-point agreement, and the precise timing of her motions filed just before damaging evidence surfaces, creating a pattern that looks frantic, calculated, and most of all like someone trying to bury the truth before it emerges. And while Blake attempts to distract attention, the problem is simple. Distraction only works when people stop paying attention, and right now, everyone, from judges to docket reporters, is watching her more closely than ever, and here's where the story twists into something almost cinematic. Except Blake isn't the hero. After months of filings, dismissals, and failed strategies, she and Jed Wallace have trapped themselves in a legal corner with no escape. While the person who benefits most from this chaos is Justin Baldoni, because court records reveal that Blake cannot sue Jed in New York. Jed cannot sue Blake in New York. Blake cannot sue Jed in Texas. Jed cannot sue Blake in Texas, and neither can risk filing in California, because entering any of these jurisdictions would immediately open the door for the other to countersue, turning the court system into legal quicksand where the moment one steps in, they sink, and Blake knows perfectly well that if she files in Texas, Jed will pull her into the very courtroom she fought to avoid. And if Jed files in New York, Blake can immediately reintroduce him into her case, and both have spent months arguing over jurisdiction, actually winning those arguments in a way that now traps each other completely, while Baldoni, in contrast, does nothing, filing no desperate motions, scrambling for no courtroom, manipulating no jurisdiction, simply watching from the sidelines as Blake and Jed systematically destroy each other's ability to proceed. And this stalemate not only weakens Blake's lawsuit but simultaneously shields Baldoni, because the one legal path she needed to advance her case, a clear forum, now does not exist, and after months of examining filings, depositions, redactions, and courtroom twists, the final picture is unmistakable. Blake Lively didn't just lose a legal battle. She didn't just lose the sequel. She didn't just lose jurisdiction. She lost everything she tried to control. With her entire strategy, the accusations, filings, pressure campaigns, distractions, sudden attacks, built on a foundation that crumbled the moment real evidence appeared, as judges rejected her arguments, witnesses contradicted her, and the documents she needed were missing, incomplete, or recreated, and every attempt to shift blame redirected the spotlight back to her, while Justin Baldoni remained consistent, quiet, focused, and professional, and in the end, every legal door slammed shut in Blake's face. Not his. The sequel she coveted remained out of reach. The power play she orchestrated was fully exposed. The narrative she constructed shattered, and the courtroom she attempted to control closed entirely to her, leaving her trapped in a limbo of her own making, unable to refile, unable to advance, and unable to escape the reality that her plan backfired far worse than anyone predicted. And now Hollywood is buzzing, reporters are writing, and fans are asking the inevitable question: how did Blake Lively manage to sabotage her own career so thoroughly? And while this legal and public meltdown continues, it's clear that every move she makes only accelerates her collapse. Every filing amplifies the perception of desperation, and every attempt to manipulate the narrative highlights her loss of control, making it obvious that in this battle, credibility and professionalism, not influence, charm, or red carpet appearances, determine the outcome. And for those following the saga, the lesson is unfolding in real time, as Blake Lively remains mired in a web of her own creation while Justin Baldoni watches his reputation recover and strengthen, proving that in Hollywood, the court of public opinion is just as powerful as the courtroom itself. And as this story continues to develop, the next document drop, courtroom twist, or filing could shift the balance even further. So those invested in the saga should stay tuned, because Blake Lively's meltdown isn't finished. And neither is the fallout that's reshaping her career, influence, and once carefully curated image in real time.